Hello, everyone, and welcome to another of our webinars. I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21 and Enfield Voices, and this is one of the many webinars we do where we talk about big issues. And today we're going to talk about climate change, which in many people's opinion is the biggest issue of all. I've got Hannah Dyson here to help me do the interview, and that's great. And the person we're interviewing is Charles Appleby. Charles has written quite a bit about climate change. He's spoken a lot about climate change, and he believes that we can make a difference individually in our communities, with our local authorities and government as well. So we're going to talk to him about that, and he'll introduce himself in a minute. Anyhow, Charles, thank you very much for joining us today. And maybe we could start, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're so concerned with climate change and your background that's led you to that. So welcome to the webinar, Charles.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you, Francis. So I got involved with climate change really about 4 years ago now. And the reason for getting involved was because myself, I'd been on some long haul flights and started to get concerned or aware of the impact on the environment of the CO2 emissions. And because it really wasn't clear where the money would go to, I was involved with charities at the time, it wasn't transparent, so I really didn't do anything about it. But once I did get involved through some friends, I started to become aware of just really what a big, serious problem it is, and the fact that we really do need to do something about it.
Okay, well, we've got Hannah with us today, as you can see, and she's going to help with the questions. So Hannah, over to you for your first question.
Hi, Charles. So you believe there's a climate emergency, which is a term used a fair amount at the moment. But what does that actually mean, climate emergency?
Okay, well, let's first set the scene. So what's happening is that there is, everyone's aware from the press that there is global warming. So last year, the IPCC, which is the world's official body on this, said that in order to basically keep the world as it pretty well is today, we really need to be looking at a maximum increase of temperature of 1.5 degrees. So what's happened so far is that there's been 1 degree of warming, maybe 1.1 degree, and it's going up all the time. But what we're actually on track, we're on track for 3.5 degrees of global warming or more. So why it's an emergency is because basically people have realized that nothing's been done about this, that this is going to cause catastrophic problems for the people, for wild animals, and for the world as we know it. And so something needs to be done about it. So what's an emergency mean? Okay, so when you talk about an emergency, then what you think of is you think of a car crash, you think of a fire or a flood. So with climate change, I think the best way of looking at it is really like a flood. We know that in 10 to 12 years' time, we are going to be flooded. But the difference is that instead of a flood suddenly happening, we know that this is going to take 10 to 12 years of work to actually prevent the flood happening. And that's the equation. This has been going on for 40 years, people saying, oh, there's going to be a problem. And for 40 years, people have delayed, not done anything about it. Now we're getting very, very close. And that's why it really is an emergency now. And that's why people need to do something about it.
Some people think we've got too close and the crash has already happened and we've gone past the point of no return, what they call the tipping point. Now, you don't actually believe that. You're slightly more optimistic than that, aren't you?
I am more optimistic because for me, the possibilities of dealing with it have really not yet been addressed. What we've got is we've got all these government reports, we've got so many reports by the UN and everybody saying what could be done. But when it comes to actually getting on with and starting, so in so many ways, we haven't really started this, and that's the opportunity space. So the possibility is that if we get 7 billion people on the planet saying, right, this planet really is collapsing and is going to be wrecked unless we do something. If everybody pulls together, starts to pull together, then we can absolutely make a difference, and we can limit climate change, and we can keep global warming to within the 1.5 degrees that the scientists say is so important.
Okay, Hannah, over to you.
So, Charles, do you believe people as individuals can make a difference, or would that just be a drop in the ocean?
It's not a drop in the ocean, Hannah. It's really, as people have said, there are these quotations, it's about people being the change, people doing their bit, particularly at the moment. So what we are, there are a number of things that are lacking in, I mean, if you look at a real emergency, in a real emergency, there was leadership, there's people running around doing things. In this emergency, there are people at the UN level. A couple of weeks ago, they were running around trying to get countries signed up to make commitments. But from our national government, local government, parish councils, there is not yet this leadership. So one of the things we all need to do is to ask for this leadership to be put in place so that we can all do our bit. But absolutely, people can do their bit themselves. I was at a meeting last night of 10 people in the area where I live, and everybody there absolutely committed to making a difference and doing something about this.
Okay, Hannah.
Do you think people will really actually do these things, such as eating less red meat, flying less, getting rid of their cars? Do you think people will actually do what they say they will do?
We're all used to doing what we do. So we're used to these behaviors. We're used to doing this. What first of all people have to think about is people got to start by thinking about, look, what do you really want? Do you want to protect your children, the future of the children, the future of the planet where we all live? Do you want to do your best for this? And people normally want to do their best for their children. Or you want to say, well, look, we just carry on as we're doing for the sake of it. We just carry on as normal. And if people look at that choice, if people look at that hard choice as to what you really want to do, I think a lot of people are going to say, well, okay, yes, I will do something if it's not too difficult and if I can get on with it and do something about it. Absolutely.
It's quite interesting you say that, because I was having a coffee this morning at 8 o'clock, and someone who's always having a coffee at 8 o'clock came up to me and said, I'm going down to Vauxhall Bridge today, and they're going to be all these demonstrators, and they're going to be blocking the road, and I could throw a bomb at them. And then he stopped and he said, but I think they're right. And, you know, that combination of inconvenience and planetary imperative is something we've got to square up, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, people have got to do what they feel able to do. I mean, Hannah asked the question about all sorts of things people can do. But first of all, people have got to understand what direction we're going in. What really is it all about? And as I say, for me, there are huge possibilities in what we can do. Now, at the moment, we're talking at a great time because people are putting themselves on the line. People are willing to be arrested in order to make the message, to say to other people to wake up and see what's going on, realize what's going on with climate change and do something about it. Everyone's got to do what they want in their own way. And absolutely, people need to make their own decision about how to protest, how to take action. The key thing, Francis, is people to do something. It's so disheartening when time and again I talk to people and they understand what's going on, they realize the options, they can start to reduce their CO2 emissions, they can use the car less, they can fly less, they can switch their electricity, they can do these things, have a great discussion, and then they walk away and it's clear they do nothing. So at the present time of the emergency, do something, do what you're inspired to do.
But isn't collective action more effective than individual action? You know, protesting, lobbying your council, lobbying your MPs, having a go at government, isn't that going to create a better output and outcome?
Collective action is very important, but I see that it's both. In an emergency situation, if your neighbour's being flooded, do you stand around and say, oh, well, it's up to the emergency service to deal with this. You know, I've got some Wellingtons in the garage, but I can't be bothered to get out. I've got to do something else. I'm supposed to be going out and meeting some people or something. Do you say, look, you know, I can't be bothered? Or do you suddenly drop everything, get the Wellingtons out the garage, rush round, help your neighbour, and do what you can to help. And that has to be the sentiment of it. And this is a piece that's missing, that government is not saying to people to actually do something.
Well, I mean, you say, pulling together, all in it together. I mean, Naomi Klein, I don't know if you read her latest book On Fire. I mean, she says individual action is not adequate unless you link it into global action. And in a way, if we departmentalize or compartmentalize everything, we're not going to be as successful as if we see our individual action as a part of a global explosion of protest.
Absolutely. My worry with the type of quote that you've said, Francis, is that it to me, it just disempowers people. If you say, you're in my example of the flood, in the flood, you're rushing around to help your neighbour, and you see someone else, you see the neighbour the other side helping, and you say, oh, well, they're helping, I don't need to help as well because they're already helping. In emergency, it's not like that. Everyone has to do their bit.
Okay, Hannah?
In your view, Charles, what would be the best action that people could take as communities in civil society?
First of all, people need to do what they feel inspired to do. They need to, everyone, to my mind, needs to take action to reduce CO2 emissions, the simple things that people can do. And the reason a lot of people don't do them is because they're not aware of them. Absolutely, I agree with Francis' point that people are going to be much more effective if they join an organisation. There's loads of organisations out there. There's international organisations, there's national organisations, organisations dealing with climate change, the environment, there's loads of them. Join in, get involved, volunteer with them, and basically it's a big multiplier on your own activity. But what also is happening, and this is the meeting I went along to last night, because of the climate emergency, everywhere there's a climate emergency now, every local authority area, most likely there are people in that area doing something. So get in contact with those people, join up with those people. And that way, everybody becomes connected through organizations and through doing something.
I mean, that's interesting that you say make connections, have a holistic approach, try and have a whole community approach to addressing the climate change imperative. What's the role of the local authority in this? So do they have a role at all?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a series of organizations. There's the international organization, which is the UN, and then the UN basically have said to national governments, it's up to national governments to make the reductions of CO2 emissions that are required. Within a national government like ourselves, we have local authorities, we have parish councils. Every one of these organisations has a role. There's community groups and organisations as well. Absolutely, they have a role. So what's happening at the moment, rather than say that local authorities aren't doing enough, what I see is that local authorities are planning, they are doing things, but they could be doing, obviously they could be doing things faster, and they could be engaging with people and getting other people involved. But what's absolutely missing here is that normally in an emergency, there are announcements, there are things to do. Everyone's given a role. So because the government and local authorities are keeping quiet about this, then basically people aren't feeling yet that so much of a need to do something about it.
Okay, Hannah?
Can individuals encourage others to drive less, take public transport? Should we as individuals be encouraging others to do that by first ditching the car, for example, walking, cycling?
Well, let's take an easy one. Let's take a really, really easy one, which is your electricity. So the data in the UK is that probably 60% of households are on standard variable rate with the big 6 electricity suppliers. Now, a lot of people have been aware for years that they can switch. People are aware that they can save money by switching. This really is time to switch. A lot of people could save money by switching. And what you're doing is you're switching to a supplier who supplies green electricity, i.e. renewable electricity, so you can get 100% renewable electricity instead. So that basically, it saves a chunk of your household CO2 emissions. The electricity is the same, it comes out the wall in the same way. so you don't even notice. So that's a really, really easy one.
But those things you just mentioned now, and going back to the local authority, they're linked in a way, aren't they? For example, one could encourage the local authority to create local energy. We saw yesterday that Norwich won the Royal Institute of Architects Prize for creating council housing that was energy intensive and sustainable. And we could encourage councils to do that. I mean, is there a case for putting pressure on councils and having some sort of pressure on them? I mean, for example, Enfield has got a bad record, according to the Friends of the Earth, in terms of climate change issues. So does civil society have a role to play as a pressure group towards those councils?
Absolutely. You mentioned the local authority with Norwich with the housing. Local authorities have a huge responsibility for housing. So it covers both new build and existing housing. So all councils have what's called a local plan. Many of those local plans can be in progress for many years in development. But that local plan is absolutely a way to bring together the climate change issues and local issues to do with planning, transport, housing, all of these things. So local authorities do control a lot of expenditure on energy, and so yes, they should be looking at what energy spend they control and switching that to green energy. They should be looking at public transport. So realistically, a lot of people are going to say, well, look, I can't use public transport because there isn't any public transport, so I have to use a car. So the options for those people are for local authorities to put in place better transport so that those people have transport, and then people to, over time, to move towards having an electric car rather than a petrol or diesel car. And particularly if someone's buying a new car, then do think hard about getting what you can do in terms of price for even a hybrid car or an electric car instead.
Okay, Hannah?
Interesting. Do you think people can do more as a school, in schools, to kind of create hubs for meetings for local people to gather, to exchange ideas? And what do you think schools can do?
Well, schools are a massive opportunity. Personally, I don't have a lot of experience at schools, but schools. I mean, this ties into the whole Greta Thunberg campaign about the school strike that took place. The schools are full of this young generation. These are the people who are going to be most affected by climate change. The message in schools seems to be mixed. Some schools have some curriculum on climate change, others have a lot. So this is absolutely an opportunity to get children involved. It seems to be what everyone's saying is there's a huge willingness from children to understand about this, to get involved. And the idea of using the school itself as a hub and bringing everything together through this is absolutely a fantastic idea, because this is where the change should be taking place.
Okay. And
people, perhaps, I don't know, parents, carers, maybe should walk to school a bit more, lead the way, and not drive, 4x4 to the school and park it right outside, because obviously, apart from the danger, it's not creating a good example.
Yeah, Hannah, I don't want to overemphasize this thing of what people should or shouldn't do. People have got their own lives, they've got their own situation, they've got their own habits. I think the first thing is for people to think about the direction of travel of this. The direction of travel is that we are using way too much fossil fuels. And what can people as individuals do about it? What's their bit that they can do? So for some people, it'll be one way, some people another way. But if people think hard about the possibilities of what they could do, then they could start to see other ways of doing the same thing. So a simple example is it possible to share that school run so that more children go in the same car? If there has to be a car, more children in the same car. If people, for example, are going on holiday, instead of going so far, can people travel less far? And maybe instead of having multiple holidays, have one longer holiday. So it's a matter of people thinking about this in their own lives. Things will have to change. In 4 or 5 years' time, we'll have a very, very different situation than now. Basically, the more people can do to think about this, get on with it, join these organisations now, then the better place people are going to be in terms of their head as to what they need to really do about all this.
Okay, Hannah.
Do you think people should lobby the local council to divest from fossil fuels?
There's been a lot of evidence over the last 4 or 5 years that divestment of investments really has happened and has made a difference. I think people need to be not just lobbying the local authority, but looking to join these organisations in their area, which are helping. So where there is an emergency, yes, get involved, lobbying the local authority, but also join that organisation to get a better in-depth understanding of really what the emergency is about and what people can do to help. Local authorities have got a massive remit. They've got the energy, they've got the local plan, they've got public transport, they've got waste. There's a huge issue to do with waste. I mean, ask anybody in this country and nobody really has a great idea of what's supposed to be happening with recycling. Is this stuff really happening? But I'm told that, for example, you folks in Enfield have got a fabulous system of recycling. And so, you know, where recycling is doing a good job, I think the local authorities need to tell us more about it, but they also need to look more at what can be done with recycling, repurposing, upcycling of goods which people just don't want, but want to, but aren't broken.
Okay, I mean, all that's very interesting, and you know, saying that people should reduce their carbon footprint, we should get communities to do that, we should get local government to do that, through recycling and so on, all that's fine, but some people will say the real problem is not reducing our carbon footprint, it's stopping those people who are producing the carbon dioxide. And this takes us to the big major corporations who are the main culprits of this. Agriculture is as well, I know, but the main corporations produce the carbon dioxide. Now, isn't that the thing that we should be concentrating on?
I think we have to focus on all of these. Francis, I don't think there's, if there was one silver bullet for this, then it would have been found a long time ago. We have to look at all. What I do see is that obviously there are businesses which are like oil and gas, right? So I mean they're producing massive amounts of oil and gas, and particular things need to be done with them. I mean we need to be digging less oil and gas out of the ground, absolutely. But in terms of some of the things, we buy concrete and steel because we want infrastructure, we want buildings. So, you know, so yes, there ideally need to be found ways of producing steel and concrete using less CO2. That's very, very important. For example, having buildings which use CO2 materials where CO2 is built into the buildings. Well, of course, I mean, wood is an example. Wood is an example of CO2 which is being grown in a tree and which is put into a building, like the floorboards in your in your picture, Francis. You've got a lot of wood which has been taken out of circulation because it's in your house. Yeah. But to focus just on corporations are doing a lot. I mean, there is a carbon disclosure project where companies are disclosing what their carbon use is. But the point is that everyone needs to do much, much more. And certainly some companies, there are companies, of course, who are doing very little and need to do much more.
Okay. Going back then to Naomi Klein, I mean, she was saying basically that what we have to do in a way is develop a greater consciousness. And that starts in a way with the way government behaves. And you wanted to ask a question on government, didn't you, Hannah?
Yes, Charles, what do you think the government should do and how do we ensure that they do what they say they do?
Let me just pick up on the consciousness one that Francis mentioned, because this consciousness is this transformation in our own minds. What do we want to do? As I said earlier, if people want to carry on and trash the planet and just carry on with the lifestyle as it is, then that's what's going to happen, because that's the direction of travel we're on. That's the easy path. The harder path is to look at ourselves, to look at our families and our children, and to say, right, well, what do we really want to do? And there's a lot of people there. Those people are protesting on Trafalgar Square and Waterloo Bridge. Those are people who are saying, right, this is not working. Right, we're pretending it's working. It's not working. We need to do something about it. So they're taking action. You may or may not agree with the way they're taking action, but you can't say they're not committed to what they're doing. So now let's come on to Hannah's question, which is about what governments are doing. The UK government has put in place legislation to say that we are going to achieve net zero CO2 emissions by 2050, which is great. It's a good start. We need most countries of the world to do that. So the government has put the paperwork in place. What they haven't yet done is done enough to actually make a start of reducing CO2 emissions. And so a critical thing for government to do, which is what a lot of people are asking, is to declare the emergency, put people in charge who are running the emergency, and run it like an emergency. As I said, we know our house is going to be flooded in 12 years' time. It takes 12 years to prepare the flood defences. If we don't start on it now, we are going to be flooded in 12 years.
Okay, so yeah, it's about developing consciousness. It's about looking at what government does and making sure they keep to their targets and their promises, and they're not empty words, empty declarations. Hannah, over to you. What do you have to say about consciousness? How important is that, do you think, in the coming years?
I think that's very, very important. And I think there is a higher level of consciousness right now. I think people look at the trees, maybe they go to the local parks, or maybe they see areas where trees should be grown. I think there's definitely a high level of consciousness. I think people, even if they don't have the time, if they're at work, I think people would like to join Extinction Rebellion and go and protest and make up the numbers and join outside councils or outside central London. But I don't know if it will be enough. That's the problem. And as you say, we don't have enough time.
So my take is we do have enough time if we look at this in terms of what are the possibilities. So I'm the founder of noco2.org, which is n0co2.org. This is about planting trees. So our tree planter has planted 265 million trees. And for people who do not wish to go down to Trafalgar Square or whatever, you can sit at home and you can click on your computer, you can make a donation, and you can buy a load of trees. And basically, if you buy enough trees, then you go carbon neutral yourself now. You don't need to wait till 2050. You go carbon neutral now, because you plant enough trees to remove all your CO2 emissions every year that the trees are growing. So the trees grow for 20, 30, 40 years, whatever, and they will remove all your CO2 every year by planting enough trees.
So are you really optimistic about the future, or are you saying that with tongue in cheek?
Not at all. It's not a question of being optimistic. It's a matter of getting on with it. So you can be optimistic about the result of a football match, but you've got to get on the pitch. You've got to play hard for 90 minutes or even some extra time. You've got to play really, really hard, and you can lose at any time. You just need just a few mistakes and you can lose. It's all about the possibilities, Francis. The possibilities are all there. As I say, to me, we haven't really started on this task of seriously reducing and removing CO2.
Okay, so I've got to pull up my floorboards at the back and plant some trees, and they'll be all behind me, which, you know.
No, not pull up your floorboards, though, but you can find somewhere to plant some trees. Fantastic. We can help you with that, Francis. Give me a call.
Well, we've got so many trees in our garden that it makes autumn really difficult when we have to get up all those leaves. But luckily trees, yeah. And we did a webinar with someone who started a social enterprise called Just One Tree, encouraging people to plant trees or to donate money to plant trees in areas where people are suffering the most from climate change. Anyhow, listen, we've sort of come to the end of the webinar now and come to the end of our time. So finally, would you like to let us know how can people find out more about what you do, and how do they get in contact?
Okay, to get in contact with No CO2 for planting trees, it's www.n0co2.org. You can also find us on Facebook. Please take a look at the website, and if you'd like to donate to remove some or all of your CO2 footprint, then do please help. Planting trees also creates paid work for people in extreme poverty, because the trees are planted in places like Madagascar and Indonesia. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much for doing that, Charles. I mean, climate change is the imperative of our time, and doing something not only does something, it also raises the consciousness of ourselves and the people that we cooperate, collaborate with. And it's that individual come collective consciousness that needs to grow and is important. And as you said earlier, and as scientists are saying, we have only something like 10 years now to make a difference. And, you know, we've got to do something about it. And there's so many issues that are sort of, you know, taking over at the moment that it's stopping us actually looking at that imperative, but that's where we need to look. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for helping to let people know what they can do, how they can develop their consciousness, because that's been very, very useful. And thank you, Hannah, for, you know, asking questions with me as well. Anyhow, Charles, thanks again. It's been great having you here. And, you know, we'll end this interview now.